My name is Rand, and this is the show where we unwrap the stories and crack the mysteries of collectible game history. But today on the show, we're doing something a bit different because rather than talking about collectible game history as it was in yesteryear, we're actually talking about a collectible game and its history that is being made right now. So to do this, we have a very special guest that is crafting their own collectible game, and this is their very first interview about it. So let's introduce them. Joining us all the way from New Zealand, our guest today has spent the last 15 years working on games. But unlike many of our guests, instead of working on tabletop games, they have been working on games for the laptop and desktop. Yes, for the last decade and a half, they have worked on a game that has attracted over 2 million players worldwide and has become one of the most loved free-to-play action RPG video games in the world. That is Path to Exile. That's right, our guest was an initial member of the Grinding Gear Games team, who, by contributing his artistic talents, helped grow the game into the internationally acclaimed success that it is today. Now, while working on its sequel, Path to Exile 2, he has carved out some time to work on a personal project. That is the upcoming, stunningly beautiful collectible card game titled Sorcery, Contested Realm. And without any further ado, we are going to introduce him. So, I am delighted to welcome to the Booster Pack a co-founder, co-owner, and creative director of Grinding Gear Games, plus somebody who will soon be adding CCG designer to that already impressive resume, ERIK OLOFSSON. ERIK, how are you?
Oh, thank you for that intro. I'm very good, thank you.
Excellent. I'm so glad to hear. I'm very excited about what I've seen about this new game you're making, and I can't wait to hear about its origins and its inspirations. So let's jump in. But before we do, I am sort of curious. I mentioned a little bit in the intro there, you have a very, very successful career down there in New Zealand. How did that all come to be with Grinding Gear Games?
For people not familiar with Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile, it is a action RPG that is very much like Diablo 2, which I hope everyone here knows. I was back in Sweden, but so Chris and Jonathan, the two other founders, they were in New Zealand, and I was kind of looking for an adventure anyway. So I think it was just a couple of weeks after that discussion, I was on a plane down to New Zealand. And at the time, we thought it would take, like, how long can it take to make a game? 1 or 2 years or something. But it was like 5 years until release or something. And now I'm here permanently. So it's like 15 years later now.
So by the sounds of it, to relax, you've decided to make an entirely different type of game for yourself. So that's a collectible card game, very different to the type of game that Path of Exile is. In fact, by its very nature, it is even played on the same type of technology. What is your personal history of collectible games? Like, how does that influence your work and stuff like that on Sorcery? Like, what is your history with collectible games?
Probably like most people, most Magic players. Like, I started out with Revised, and I was hanging out in the sort of card game store, just being a kid, and a little bit later I started playing, well, semi-competitively, and for whatever reason, my small hometown in Umeå, northern Sweden, it has this ridiculous high of occurrence of like professional Magic players. So at one point, I even went to a pro tour. It was a team pro tour, though.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's cool. So one angle of this card game is, of course, to make this cool card game that is a little bit like how it was back in the day.
Excellent. So its influence comes from sort of old school, revised, what they call old school Magic now. That's sort of 93 to 94, maybe a little bit later as well, sort of style of Magic, yeah?
Yes, exactly. So in Sweden, we never got. So I started after Legends, for example. Mm-hmm. So those cards came like you could get them in trade, but it wasn't really sold in stores. But it was this kind of mythical old thing.
Holy Grail cards.
Yeah, exactly. And then now a few years ago, then I started collecting cards as well. So it's very much like the Four Horsemen, like those legends, antiquities, Arabian Nights, the Dark. So I have like sets of those, and of course Alpha as well.
Such iconic cards indeed. So that sort of brings us to where I sort of see Sorcery, because it is very heavily influenced, obviously, by those 4 sets. And in fact, I believe you even have a bunch of the artists that have that worked on the game working on Sorcery. Some people who are watching the video version of this might actually be able to see some of those on screen at the moment. But I did want to ask a little bit about it. So do you want to just give me a bit of an overview for anybody listening or watching what Sorcery is, like, from your perspective?
It's a cardboard game, you could say. It's a strategic square grid game that uses, well, what I try to make extremely flavorful cards and a top-down design, which means that the cards, like, you start the design with a really cool like creature or name, and then you sort of follow it throughout the rules text and everything to make it kind of perfectly understandable and nice. It's kind of a fresh start like that, where it's like you look at a card and it does what you think it does. So it's quite a kitchen table game, in the sense that it's possible to play it for casual people, like without knowing the rules super exactly. Like you play the cards how it feels like they should play. Though it should still work quite well as a competitive game too. But that's the goal, is very much to create a just very nice and good, fun kitchen table experience, and then the rest will kind of follow from that.
Okay, wow. All right. So I have taken a look at some of the cards, and you're 100% right. Almost like those early days of Magic, a dragon feels like a dragon when you play it, or a fireball feels like what a fireball would do, like those early Magic days. It's not like so much today where there's all this mechanical balance and crabs are taking cards off tops of decks and stuff like that. It is very much rooted in that original sort of limited edition, alpha beta style Magic of that top-down design, almost like an adventure and stuff like that. So where did the idea come from for Sorcery? Like, what was the first inkling that you had about making the game?
Well, my history with card design is also like I did used to do custom card design for Magic.
Oh yeah, I think we've all tried.
And then I'm also very much a avid old school player. I had this idea where I did kind of alternate universe old school cards. So, for example, I had these moxes that combines colors.
Dual moxes.
Yes, exactly. But it's kind of a mix between a mox and gemstone mine, where you can tap it twice. Like you have a counter for each color, but it costs 0 to put it out. So I had that, and I even got Dan Frazier to do, like I commissioned him to do art for that as well. So that's and that, like, it really much, it goes to that same feel of recreating that type of iconicness. So that was before I thought about making a card game. But then later, a natural step then came to make, okay, maybe I could just make a card game that is very much like old school Magic. And the first iteration was very much like Magic, except it had like this kind of small quirks to it that was different. And this was all in my head. I didn't even play test this much. And so it was more about making iconic cards that are kind of like the old ones. So for example, I had a a mix between Mind Twist and Ancestral Recall, like just one black or the one black mana or demonic mana or whatever it would have been in this game, and it makes your opponent discard 3 cards. Like completely broken, of course, but I had the concept of having unique cards, as I call them, that was like sort of pre-restricted, just like in old school.
That brings me to a question about the game. Actually, you mentioned you commissioned Dan Fraser's art in there. And one of the things that people can see now, if they join the Sorcery TCG Facebook page or even the Discord, you can find this art that is going to be used for the game. And it has a ton of original Magic artists like Melissa Benson. You already mentioned Dan Fraser, a ton of them. So unlike most collectible card games, it looks like you almost have a complete set of art ready to go now. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about the inspiration behind that?
Well, first I should correct. Dan Fraser doesn't actually have any piece in this card game, unfortunately. Yeah, so that was for before. But with the art and like the thinking about the art, that type of thing. So one of the things, like the iconicness of the art, comes from artists with a different style. So a kind of modern corporate thing that companies do, or like, well, maybe I should say more of a sort of art director temptation, would be to make everything look kind of the same and like follow exactly the same guide. And this is like, it makes a lot of sense if you try to create a cohesive world, say in a computer game. And obviously, like you try to do that and it's all great and everything, but it means that everything looks very similar, and it's also just your world that the company is doing. But early MTG and also Sorcery, like it has more of it's more about triggering the imagination of the player or the artist even. So having different styles, and also like top-down design, where like there can be many different versions of, say, I don't know, like a dragon or an ogre in the world. And I think there's something to leaving that to the specific artist and even to the player. Like you put the like an alpha example would be like Vesuvan Doppelganger. Like it has a very cool sort of place name, and like who is this? Like what is this card about? Like it doesn't have a, well, maybe there is a specific location in Magic the Gathering now, but it's like it almost becomes more triggering to your imagination if it's not spelled out. Like it just sort of hinting at the bigger story that's there. And it's up to you to sort of fill it out.
Well, I love this because it really does invoke that sort of old school Magic where there was a more eclectic style of art before Wizards of the Coast started to bring in, you know, massive creative teams and continuity, as they called it back then, around about the end of Mirage, sort of Tempest block. It really does feel like every card is vibrant and living in its own world, and they can all mix together sort of in your imagination. Like if you have a sorcerer and a fireball that don't quite look like they're from the same style of art, your imagination will put those together. And I really like that philosophy of sorcery that you just talked about there, because it does invoke that old school feeling. Another thing I noticed about all the art is it appears that all of these classic artists are exclusively working in paint. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, that's another thing. I wanted to have it so that it's all hand-painted art. And that's again because it's something that's getting lost a bit today. And of course, there's a reason for it. Like working digitally, like it's twice as fast. And if you have to change something, then you just, you have Control Z to take back like your brush strokes. And also from the art director perspective, like if something needs to change in a card, like you can actually change it, while with the sorcery art, like you have to kind of, in many cases, you have to start over from scratch.
Well, you don't need to worry about that as much if you're letting the artists, sort of run with their vision, like you were saying.
Yes, so that goes very much hand in hand. Like doing a hand-painted world where everything has to be kind of perfect with like style guides and sort of concept art for things, like it would be quite a nightmare and take a lot of time. But this actually makes it possible. And another thing with the hand-painted art and like the different styles is that like it makes it easier to remember and tell cards apart from each other. So say Melissa Benson, and I have an example is this Screaming Skull card that has this sort of strong red background. Like it's kind of impossible to see that and not remember it. And of course, then you also remember what it does. And when you see a card like on the other side of the table, or even like you're walking down the hallway and you see people play the game, like you can see everything from a distance, and it's easy to remember things. There's something to that this game has, I think.
Well, I think I've noticed that in my playtesting of it this week, I've noticed that you've decided to make all the cards art spread all the way to the edge. They almost look like art cards with some rule text on them. And they look so iconic. Even the printed copies, like from a home printer that I have, are stunning to look at when they're on the table.
Yeah, that's another thing. So that's inspired from like MTG Card Alter, like the Card Alter community, where there's all these people spending a lot of effort doing sort of borderless cards, and it's sort of universally liked. So why not just do that look? It seems like everyone just likes it. So, yeah. And I guess back in the day too, like the printing techniques were like, it helps to have a border on the cards. Like it sort of makes it easier to not do mistakes and so on. But by now, the printing techniques are so good and exact, so there's nothing really stopping that. And I don't think there's much of a price difference either. So maybe if printing didn't work like it did back in the day, maybe they would have done more sort of full art like this.
I'm sure the old school and old Magic lovers are well and truly familiar with those miscuts, or even like the thin side borders in alpha and beta cards. So I'm sure they know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so that's what the black border helps against that kind of thing. And also with the MTG Alter community, I have a few artists from there as well. So I try to pick artists from like different genres even. I have a couple of like black metal band artists to get more of a sort of, like the game is certainly not like dark when you look at, like the cards are quite colorful, but it's also, but it still has a kind of strange seriousness to it in a way.
Mm-hmm. From what I've seen so far, it has a very foreboding atmosphere.
Yeah, it's a bit strange how that works. Like you can be quite sort of colorful and have a lot of different styles, but you can still get that sort of almost foreboding feel, or a sort of serious feel to it, which I also think is something that Alpha Magic did in a great way. Okay,
so just quickly, you sort of mentioned in there that you didn't have any sort of direct cohesion to the world or anything like that. Will Sorcery have a narrative story to it, like Magic does nowadays, or so many collectible card games have in the past, or will cards stand alone in sort of allow the game to tell the story itself?
At least in the beginning, I will want to have them stand alone as much as possible. There might be something, so say several expansions down the line, you probably have to make the story kind of more like you probably have to play more with story elements like that, because it's, when you make a game, like the first set, like you have a certain luxury of riding on existing tropes, like for example, a dragon and an ogre and so on. And it's kind of cool and flavorful in itself. But as time goes on and you have thousands of cards, then you probably need to sort of explore other spaces with that. But I will definitely, as long as possible, try to keep that the sort of iconicness by themselves type of feel. I have a couple of expansions already sort of planned out in my mind that does a little bit more story stuff while still keeping the sort of iconicness and feel from the original set as well.
Well, that makes so much sense considering you're trying to invoke that style of sort of early Magic. And those first few sets, especially limited edition and unlimited, that sort of alpha beta stuff was all that top-down design, as we mentioned earlier. So I do think that that is definitely a valid technique, because obviously Richard said that when he designed it that way, he might have given things names like Vesuvian Doppelganger and stuff, but he wanted people to be able to imagine the experience and be immersed in it the same way that he felt when he played RPGs. So I think that that's fantastic. I'm excited to see what you have in the future. But before we move on to what might come down the line, I'm wondering, let's jump back to gameplay for Sorcery for a second. So you said that there was a board, sort of like almost like I think it's now 4x5 grid, that you play on. Was there any direct inspiration from any other tabletop games or even, tactical RPGs or anything like that for this particular part of the design?
So the square grid came very much from my co-designer, Nicholas Reynolds. So it's kind of a stroke of genius thing by him. There was this situation where I was traveling in the US and I was about to visit him, and he had been talking about this kind of square grid design that he was very excited about, and I was kind of skeptical, thinking that probably would just be best to have it be quite similar to old school Magic instead. But we had a couple of test games with just sort of paper cards, like just written text on, and there was a couple of really cool interactions. Like I still remember having this kind of this fat creature card that could hook other creatures like across the square grids.
Oh yes, I think there's a butcher or something in the game now that does that.
Yeah, so that was kind of the minion that sold it to me. So then, we just decided to run with it, and this is the kind of thing where we thought it was kind of a very original and new thing, but as it is now later, like it's almost like I'm discovering another square grid game every week. And it's a little bit scary because there's so many of these games and none of them really took off. So there seems to be something that's really like almost inherently hard about a square grid design like this. But I'm not quite sure why that is. And from playtesting with this one, it seems like, it's working really well. People are really enjoying it. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, I mean, maybe just the reason it hasn't taken off, none have done it in the right way yet. So if you can play test and make sure it feels natural and feels so integral to the game, like I said, I've been play testing what you've made available publicly, and there is so many mechanics that are interesting and interact with the grid in such a unique sort of way. Like there's I grew up playing things like Final Fantasy Tactics and stuff like that, and even Shining Force is one of my favorite games of all time. And there is a lot of that sort of gameplay in it where you've got to choose where your character is at the time and be able to do damage in a certain direction and everything like that. I think it's a really exciting thing if you can nail it down.
Yeah, it seems to work well. Maybe it's also a case of there's a lot of older games that failed with it because they were quite like complicated, but now there's certain modern card game principles. Like there's a certain like games like Hearthstone, for example, that does like it's like simplify,
Yeah, it does play at the moment. It plays rather simply. Like you mentioned earlier, you were happy to embrace a more casual style play of the game, and it definitely has that feel at the moment. Like it doesn't feel too crunchy. But I've played a lot of collectible card games, ones that have used grids, and this one does feel a little bit different. So hopefully you have that in your cap. I've also played a lot of collectible games where like moving to locations matter and stuff like that. And this one sort of felt like it streamlined that in a really familiar sort of way.
Maybe it is all about the details. Like one detail that improved it a lot. Like, so take sites. In the beginning, I had the sites had a sort of portrait format, like all cards were sitting up. But then at one point we like, the sites can just be like landscape format sideways. And that of course makes it a lot easier to put minions on top of them.
Yeah, well, I'm very excited about it. So you mentioned playtesting before. Talk to me a little bit about like what some of the lessons you've learned through playtesting Sorcery and some of the biggest changes that maybe you've had to make in that time.
You put me a little bit on the spot here. There would be a lot of examples.
Yeah, well, you mentioned before, obviously, even an example I found is I think I found some earlier rules documents that meant that the grid was even larger before, and you've scaled that down. Now, why did that happen?
That's a good example where games could continue on for like an hour and a half. And you also got a lot of turns where in the beginning of the game, if you're not in contact with your opponent, then things you get kind of uneventful turns in the beginning. So the play grid kept shrinking and shrinking. And of course, I also, because of that, I introduced cards like polar bears that can attack backwards. So, and void walk is another type of minion that like you can just summon it in the void and they can go in and attack. So there's been a lot of stuff that sort of increases the contact between the players. I guess another playtest thing that just came to mind now was that the sites used to have very sort of complicated things where like they give bonuses to minions on the site, and it's hard to, like, you get sort of a mountain of cards on top of each other giving bonuses to each other. So a change there would be like a lot of the sites give a comes into play bonus, and then they're kind of normal, like they don't do so much after that. So that's another one that after playtesting to simplify it a lot.
I definitely felt that was a huge advantage when I was playtesting, because you're right, it can, if the 3 or 4 interactions are on a single site, you don't want to be thinking about what the site's effect is itself. There is a handful where that is still relevant, but most of them nowadays, and basically I guess what you would call the basic lands or sites, all have a genesis effect, or it comes in a battle play effect. So yeah, you're 100% right. While it looks like a complicated board state, especially in the sense that somebody might be used to Magic or something like that, it's not as complicated as it looks.
Yeah, and also combining combining power and toughness to just a single number. That's another one where there's a lot of complexity coming from the square grid and the placement, so you don't quite need the same complexity in combat because of that.
Interesting. So there is something else that's really unique about the game, at least from somebody's perspective who's only played major CCGs like Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or even Magic. This game introduces 2 decks. Do you want to just quickly talk about what those 2 decks do? Yeah,
so you have your Atlas and your Spellbook, and the Atlas contains sites, and the Spellbook, of course, spells. Spells being minions and relics.
Mm-hmm.
Having 2 decks like that, like it ensures, since you're so dependent on sort of building your playing field, it ensures that you have a steady stream of sites coming.
Yeah, so for the competitive player, I mean, somebody who loves to min-max, their options and stuff like that, this game allows you to basically almost have a second deck of, to put it in Magic terms, just land, and you'd only draw land when you need it. I found it very convenient when I was playtesting a Sorcery recently.
It also means that sites can have quite powerful effects in the. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can draw a site, like you can top date a site that actually does enough to sort of changed the board state a lot, like the Maelstrom, for example.
I don't think I came across that one yet.
It's a site that when you play it, it sucks everything in the world one step towards it.
Yeah, I would have remembered that.
Like, sites can be really powerful. So in a way, it's like, yeah, it's not like lands that do almost nothing.
So that sort of brings me to my sort of last gameplay question. Can you, admittedly, the mat is quite cumbersome. Do you think, like, just to carry it around, and the portability of a collectible card game is usually so important, do you envision that people could play hypothetically without the mat?
The mat is, I find it being almost only really needed as a teaching tool. So I think all the playtest, like, I've never actually played with a mat, and all playtesting is without it. So once you sort of know that the grid is like 5x4 and you get used to it, I think you're only like 3 games in or something, you can play without it completely fine.
Well, I'm so excited to see how it evolves. I played only a handful of times, and I felt like I could get rid of that mat immediately. It definitely, for the last couple of turns of my last game, I did play a little bit without it to see if it was possible, and it was absolutely fine. And in fact, it freed up it took away a little bit of cognitive sort of load. Once you've sort of made sure that you've got things in the right sort of grid setting, it felt really good. So that's just something I wanted to mention, because sometimes I guess if people are seeing this game and going, oh, it's a grid-based game, I don't want to have to carry around a giant mat or something like that. You don't have to worry about that. That is something that is just, like you said, just a teaching tool for the early players and stuff like that. So don't get locked down in that. This can be as portable as Magic the Gathering is. So I do want to move away from gameplay just quickly into your philosophy and ideas about what Sorcery's availability would be. There has been a lot of contention in, especially in independently produced collectible card games and trading card games at the moment that have seen success on Kickstarter or even, other New Zealand collectible card games, that their availability has been an issue lately. So my question, I guess, to first off is, how do you envision getting this game into the hands of players?
Oh, the first edition will be exclusively Kickstarter, and I want to make it only through Kickstarter as well, just to make sure that everyone knows how big the first print run is, and also, yeah, there's no funny stuff going on like that.
Mm-hmm.
And also after the Kickstarter, so currently all the attention has to go into get the Kickstarter running and getting that first print run out. But after that would be the next focus. After that would then be the second edition and making like onboarding kits for like brick and mortar stores, that type of thing. And hopefully that edition would be even larger.
I think you're going to have a lot of fans, considering the artistic direction you've taken this. I think you're going to have a lot of fans very excited once people start seeing it.
Another thing with that's sort of related to this and the art production as well, being that it is quite, production is in general not as fast as modern card games. Like, I don't quite see it as possible to do 3 expansions per year, for example, just because of how it works with the hand painted art, and also the way I'm set up with like it's a side project still, so it doesn't quite have that machinery behind it. So I have to warn people a little bit there, where I see it more as a 1 expansion per year kind of thing, but that would also guarantee a very unique quality that you can't see elsewhere.
It's a quality over quantity sort of game. I like that as well. And it doesn't put the pressure on the collector to keep up as much as it does with, say, games, like Magic nowadays that is a big complaint in the community, where they have literally 8 booster sets coming out in a year, if not even more.
This probably also connects a little bit to me being an old school player. And as you get a little bit older, maybe it's a bit harder. Like, you don't quite have time to keep up with 5 expansions per year. But if there was 1 expansion per year and the game is high quality, then at least personally, that's something I would like. And I do know that this goes very much against conventional wisdom with what do you have to do to keep a card game alive. But I guess we will just see how that plays out. I just personally think that this can work.
I would love for you to experiment in this space, and I think it's much needed, especially considering you're going for this original aesthetic that you are. I mean, there was periods for old school Magic where there was 8 months without a release, or even longer in some cases. So I really think that embodies the vibe of sort of like, again, I told you before we turned the mics on that I played it and it felt like I was playing a 90s TCG in a good way. It felt like I was playing an old game that's brand new, and I really am excited about that. So let's go to the big question that is always going to come up with collectible games. How are these games going to be packaged? Like, I assume you're going to be making booster packs and maybe a start deck and everything like that. Tell me about that.
Love it or hate it, it's opening boosters. That's very much part of that experience. And I personally like that a lot.
Me too.
Yeah, I've had quite a few people suggest going the living card game route, which like I understand the argument, but then yeah, I just like ripping boosters open myself, and other people would do it as well. And I also really like drafts in MTG, like draft and seals, and there's something to the like sort of expanding your card pool and like building your deck that is just awesome that you don't get from the living card game thing.
Completely agree with that philosophy. Like, obviously the name of the podcast is the booster pack. It's not called the box set or anything like that. So I 100% agree with you. And I think the conventional wisdom and the reason that these indie TCGs are taking off at the moment is because, like you said, that conventional wisdom was that this was not a viable way for a lot of companies to do it. And the audience has spoken to the opposite side of things. And with collectibility and people almost seeing these things as an investment asset nowadays, it is essential, I think, to a healthy game.
Yeah, it's hard to explain. It's like almost like the living card game should be the one that's working, but it's, yeah, like you said, the market has spoken, and like people want to rip packs open.
There's nothing more exciting than cracking boosters. Trust me, I've done my fair share. Now, I did want to ask you, you mentioned before that there are different orientated cards. So like your spellbook cards are portrait, and your atlas cards are landscape. And then there's an entirely different type of card type, the avatar, which sort of acts as your hero. You know, if you're playing Flesh and Blood, it's your hero, or it's an avatar sort of card. Are they all going to be included in a single booster pack, or is there different ways to get them? Or what is your philosophy as far as what is in when somebody is cracking one of those booster packs?
There would be a bunch of avatars that you still find like normal in booster packs. There will be starter decks that have like a guaranteed avatar, and also pre-constructed decks that have an avatar coming with them. I might also do things like each booster box might have a box topper avatar, just so that you can guarantee it. So I have some kinks to sort of work out there when it comes to say booster drafting, for example. Like maybe I would have to have it so that there's one avatar that you can kind of use as the default, if you don't get any other one.
Yeah, well, that's what's inspired the question. I was always going to be interested, if you are drafting, how does that work with, because there are components that you need. And like I said, there is sort of a basic type of site, which I guess you could have much like Land in Magic, where you can add as many to your deck as you like. My next question, I guess, is about rarity, which is always a big question. As we said, people love opening packs, and the thing that people love is getting those rares, right? So how does rarity work in Sorcery? So
partly inspired by old school Magic and restricted cards. I have a system where, so you have the ordinary cards, then you're allowed to have 4 in the deck, and that's kind of like common cards. And then I have exceptional cards that you can have 3 of in a deck it's kind of like uncommons. and then I have elite cards, and that's like 2 in each deck, which would be rares. And then I have actual unique cards that only allows 1 in each deck, and those would be the most rare cards as well, where the rare slot in the booster would have either an elite card or a unique card.
Wow. Okay. Sort of like Magic's common, uncommon, rare, and then mythic rare sort of structure.
It's quite comparable. Yes.
Okay. So the next big question when it comes to Rarity and these sort of card games is, what is your philosophy, especially being an old school player and somebody who's trying to invoke that feeling of old school? What is your philosophy towards things that Magic the Gathering do almost to excess nowadays? Things like alt arts and especially this one, foils. How do you see that for Sorcery?
So I have a version of foil that, this would be interesting to hear, to see comments from your viewers on as well. But I have a version of foil, which is, it's a textless full art on the back, but it has the normal card on the front, which means that with sleeves, you can play with it normally. So you don't get any trouble where you have to like look up online what the card does. Like you can just look at the back. So that would be one. I am also considering having foil as well. I was active before foil really took off. I'm not personally invested in foil in the same way, but I do recognize that it can look very cool, and it's something that a lot of people want. And there is like Flesh and Blood cold foils look very nice, and maybe I will explore something like that.
That is a very exciting thing for Flesh and Blood players. So I'm sure you would get some excitement from your community about that for sure.
It would be quite a bit of work to do it right, and like it increases printing costs a little bit and so on. But I will have to explore it a bit more.
Okay, so I guess the last question I have in around sort of Rarity there is something that is a little bit, controversial or at least highly discussed in the old school community, in almost any TCG community, and that is reprints. What is your philosophy for Sorcery in regards to reprints?
On a sort of gut level, I'm against reprints, just from being an old school player myself. Like there's something about it that feels wrong. So I have a hard time seeing myself doing reprints. At least it would not be reprints in the same art, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I have to put an disclaimer that it's subject to change, what I'm saying now.
Of course.
But my feelings are, I'm in general skeptical to reprints.
Well, so far on things like foil and so far on things like reprints, philosophically, we definitely align. Now, obviously, a lot of these questions, you're still playtesting and the Kickstarter hasn't even launched yet. This is a proto interview for the game, so everything should actually be asterisked with that subject to change sort of attitude. I do want to ask about, the future that maybe you envision for Sorcery if it's a complete success, which I feel like from what I've seen so far, it has an absolute potential to be, and you've got my pledge already. So I want to ask about, you mentioned it sort of before, 1 expansion per year. Are you planning to have these themed sort of in the way that, the Dark and Legends and Arabian Nights were? Like, do you have an idea as far as that goes, or is that just something that you're going to consider further down and just bring in more of that sort of fantasy feel?
It would be very much along the lines of the feel of things that happened back in the day. I guess I can say that much. And also, I am specifically not afraid of doing things like Arabian Nights, where they take an existing theme.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't mean to speak much about this, but for example, one idea I have is this King Arthur themed expansion.
Well, one of the things I've always hoped that had happened with Magic, which obviously it didn't, and you know, it ended up succeeding and stuff like that, but more sets in those early days that took direct inspiration from classic literature in the way that Richard Garfield did with Arabian Nights. So you saying that you love that sort of the idea of maybe a Knights of the Round Table sort of myth, or, you know, even something like, you know, Egyptian theme or something like that, or some other trope or something. Like, I've always fantasized about if there was a Sherlock Holmes Magic set. That is very exciting that you're not going to lock yourself down, right?
My plan is very much not to build some corporate IP that gets this is not really a critique or complaint against company that does that, because that, like, you can do that in a great way, and like we're doing that with Path of Exile in Grinding Gear Games, but it doesn't have to be that way, I guess, is the point.
I'm very excited. I mean, you're left it open, like there could be any sort of, like, one of the most popular, you know, up and coming digital card games is something like Storybook Brawl, which is taking all of those IPs, whether it's not IPs, sorry, but like ideas like Alice in Wonderland and Wizard of Oz and all that sort of stuff, and using that. And I would be very excited to see what you could do if you keep to this philosophy.
It's funny you mentioned Storybook Brawl, because Matt Place was like one of the, well, first of all, he was involved very early on with some investment in Grinding Gear Games, but he also was maybe probably the third person that play tested this card game.
Oh, wow, really?
Actually, the sites coming into play, doing mostly comes into play effect instead of sitting there and making the board state extremely complicated. That comes from his early advice. Okay,
so you said before we wanted to do the kitchen table sort of game, but you are getting the top tier game design advice from previous Magic the Gathering professional player Matt Place.
Yeah, when you put it like that, it's a bit crazy, yeah.
Well, we before we turned the mics on, we were talking about how Magic's balance didn't really come into play until they started hiring people off the Pro Tour. But it looks like you've already got that in spades. So I'm so glad to hear that there is that connection. And we sort of mentioned that this, at least initially, is going to be more of a casual sort of, you know, as you dubbed it, kitchen table style collectible card game. And that's going to be at the front of the company, the sort of the perspective and philosophy for this game. But what do you envision ideally as far as an organized play system? You mentioned store introduction kits and stuff like that. Did you want to sort of see in-store tournaments? Like, tell me about what your dream is for that.
I very much would hope there would be a sort of tournament scene. There would be challenges, of course, with, like, if not as many sets come out per year, then the tournament scene would be, like, I can see it be a bit more focused on sort of yearly tournaments rather than a circuit that happens very often. But I don't know. Luckily, I'm kind of close to the Flesh and Blood guys here in New Zealand. I'm definitely going to talk to them about that.
Okay, that's so interesting. I was going to ask if there was any inspiration from Flesh and Blood, because you were so, you know, you're in the same city, basically. I was going to ask if there was any sort of cross-pollination there, or any sort of inspiration from one game to this one.
Maybe not mechanics, and maybe I sort of subconsciously even specifically make it like the whole kitchen table thing, while they have a very much tournament first kind of approach. So maybe I'm sort of niching myself compared to them, sort of subconsciously, I guess. But yeah, it's great to see their success, and like, it's actually possible, like, not being one of the existing super big players.
Well, it's so fascinating that New Zealand is sort of, you know, if Sorcery is successful and stuff like that, like, they've sort of proven that you don't need to be, you know, a Seattle-based company to achieve huge success in this category.
That's great.
I guess that leads me to ask sort of my last question as far as Sorcery goes that I came up with. And the other thing that's really popular in games like Magic at the moment is the option for multiplayer. Like, how do you see Sorcery and fitting in with a multiplayer? Because so far it's only just, you know, two avatars on a grid going against each other. Do you think that it is a game that would allow that sort of play?
Playtesting with that has been extremely limited, but I think like the rules would work completely perfectly if you do, say, a 6x6 grid or 7x7 or something. And theoretically, you can just add on more people. Like, obviously, the games would carry on for like hours, and like as you sort of wander over the battlefield and so on.
Of course, yeah. One square per turn takes a long time to get across a 7x7 grid.
Well, it would probably be quite a different experience, but yeah, it definitely works.
I could definitely see it having that sort of war game epic feel, almost like a Warhammer or something like that, like where you could sit down for an entire day and just battle out a massive avatar on avatar duel with six player free for all. It's very inspiring to see the options that this game presents.
Yeah, that's, well, another thing with the game is that it does tap a little bit into the board game side of things. So especially sort of casual board gamers, I think, will have a good time with it. And many of the early playtesters also are more from the board game side of things.
Okay.
And like they have the rules questions and like some guy talking excitedly about something that happened during the game. So clearly it works for the that type of people that isn't just sort of competitive, like 1 versus 1 type of player.
Well, maybe that's the thing that's been missing from all these other grid-based collectible games that we spoke about earlier. Maybe having that perspective is going to be a huge advantage for Sorcery, and I honestly can't wait to see how it develops.
Yeah, that will be good to see.
So that brings me to a segment on this show that we do usually called community questions, but this game has sort of only got the smallest community. So I did put it out in the playtester sort of Discord, which anybody listening can join, the Discord server for Sorcery. Check that out. I'm sure I will put a link into the description below eventually. But these are some questions that have been on the mind of players. So shout out to the Discord community there and the few people who reached out and had some amazing questions here for Eric. So let me just jump in with the first question from the player community. Obviously, your heritage, we've spoken about your provenance in gaming, and that comes from Grinding Gear Games and Path of Exile. And very famously, you mentioned him earlier, Chris Wilson is a big Magic player, especially in the old school sort of realm. And even one of the partners early on was Brian Weissman as well, who was very famous in early Magic. Have those people contributed or had a look at this game just yet?
Yeah, so I think it was last weekend even, Chris was looking at some cards, and he's extremely precise when it comes to wording and things. So I was preparing this print to go out to some content creators actually, and he found a bunch of problems there.
Yep.
Yeah, they both have play tested as well. Brian actually also played that super early version that Matt played as well.
So, like anybody watching can be very assured that you're getting the absolute best feedback that anybody could possibly have for a competitive card game.
I have to say, Brian, he kind of have old school Magic solved in the sense, well, as far as I am concerned, like he has the best deck.
It's literally called the deck.
But also old school, like as it is now, when like there's these tournaments and like I have a version of the deck and I think I'm very good at playing. But of course, when I play against him, then I'm the one doing the play errors.
Yeah, he's got the home field advantage on that one.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my next question from the community is a little bit more of a reaction to the current state of collectible games. Now, with the we've mentioned it a couple of times, the boom in independent trading card games, there has been a heavy reliance, and you just mentioned it there, that you have reached out to influencers and stuff like that. Is that something that you plan to do more and more as this strategy for Sorcery comes forward? Are you going to reach out to more people? I guess the name that everybody sort of wants to know about is Alpha Investments, and I know he has a strong connection to Path of Exile. Is that somebody you expect to engage with moving forward?
Yes, I hope so. well, the print cards I prepared last weekend was actually part of preparing a package for him. Hopefully he will be interested and make a video about it. But yeah, so that's part of printing an actual box with like proper packaging on boosters themselves, so on. So it would be a box that isn't randomized, but it would give kind of the proper booster box opening experience. At least that's the goal. And there would be like 5 of these boxes existing in the world that I would send out to a very few select people.
Well, those people can consider themselves blessed. So that is a big question that obviously faces the community nowadays, and there's a lot of controversy surrounding it. And you know what? I hope that he puts it out there because he has a big platform and is able to get it into the eyes of the right kind of people. That's for sure. So moving on from that, this is a little bit more of a fluffier question. Path to Exile is famously got a few Magic the Gathering references in it, like there's underground seas and stuff like that. As far as the gameplay goes, obviously you guys played a lot of Magic the Gathering. Do you envision any of the any references or Easter eggs to Path of Exile showing up in Sorcery?
There is, if you look closely on the card Erik's Curiosa, then there's a secret hidden there. That would be one example.
It'll be up for those who can't see it. It'll be up in the video at the moment. You can pause the video and stare at it for as long as you like.
Yeah, I'm sure though, like there would be a situation where there's like, I don't know, 200 things that sort of subconsciously makes it in that are kind of similar or like sort of subtly references things. So yeah, there definitely would be some philosophy overlap, even though like obviously the games are very different, but I'm sure as a player of Path of Exile, you would see things that carries over.
I can definitely speak to the Magic card community, and they love when you find little Easter eggs on cards and stuff like that, you know, references to old school cards and everything like that. I mean, if you look at something like, you know, Sage Owl in Magic, it got a mini little version of Ancestral Recall on and stuff on it. So players love finding that sort of Easter eggy type stuff. So my next question is, in the game at the moment, the version I've seen at least has 4 sort of factions, or what would sort of surrogate as Magic's sort of color pie. There's, based on the elements, there is fire, water, wind, and earth. Is that something that you're going to lock, or do you expect that you will expand those ideas out to other factions as the game evolves?
Probably gonna stay. I wouldn't say it's 100% sure thing, but if they are gonna change, they would have to change very soon, because as it goes with color pies, like the more expansions you would get into a game, the more of all the niches you would fill out in the existing colors, if you see what I mean. Like it would have been easy to add a 6th color to Magic as the second expansion, but now it's just insanity, if you see what I mean.
It would be crazy, yeah.
Yeah, but I also have, since avatars can have quite big abilities that are game-changing, and that's kind of something I can play around with instead of extra colors and so on. So I'm probably more likely to go down that route with avatars doing very, very new and fancy things instead of adding new elements. Then again, there is things like, I don't know, light and darkness and so on that is very flavorfully interesting. So I might, well, there's things to consider there. I don't have anything locked in though.
Oh, absolutely. It's such an early stage of the game. It's just, I was curious if that would be something that that evolves with the game, or if it always going to be those sort of 4 sort of slices of, you know, your proverbial element pie or whatever it would be. Okay, so moving forward, I guess a question for collectors is, how many cards do you envision being in the initial set release?
So probably 400 or very close to it. It's nice to have a big booming number, so I'll probably make it not be below 400. I currently have maybe 405 unique pieces of art made, and there's still a couple trickling in. So that's the kind of thing where I got a little bit carried away, just sort of sitting and designing individual cards so it's been going on for 3 years now, I think, this project. And sitting and doing the card names and like flavor and effect and like doing all of that, like that. This project was kind of for me being able to sit by myself and sort of doing that in a kind of introverted kind of flow state. So that's why I got a bit carried away with a lot of cards. But it does mean I have so much to sort of grab from now when it comes to sort of tying the bag together and like actually getting the Kickstarter out.
Right. I mean, I'm so excited for it. So I guess my sort of question buried in there is, with so many cards and everything like that, do you feel like, just to emulate what Magic the Gathering does or did in their early days, do you feel like there will be, your game's version of what is now known by Magic players as the Power 9? Do you feel like that is going to be something that you'll either intentionally put in the set or maybe even try and push towards?
I've been trying to make it so that it isn't something that I decide, but it is something that would be decided by players. I am pretty sure there will be broken things though, because that's the top-down design and sort of keeping cards sort of functionally pure to what the name is and caring a little bit less about perfect balance, like that's kind of a little bit part of the same package. So I suspect there will be cards that get very kind of unbalanced and good. But
infamous.
Yeah, but the game also is a bit like with the card rarity, with like elite and unique cards and so on. I hope that it's almost like the most rare cards would be sort of pre-restricted almost. So hopefully the game is a little bit more resilient because of that. So I wouldn't, at least I hope I don't need to do sort of ban lists and stuff like that, just because you have one card in the deck, then like you can't reliably draw it every game, then it becomes like a bit less of a problem, I hope. This is, of course, like famous last words, because of course it will not really work exactly like I predict it will. But
yeah, there'll be no channel fireball or anything like that in the first sets, we hope.
I don't think so, but yeah, I'm sure players will find stuff.
I'm sure they will. I mean, I can't wait to see what the players do with this game, because just playing this, it does invoke that sort of classic Magic feel, that old school feel, but it is a completely different thing, and it is more like a board game experience. So I feel like, as I mentioned before, that this could be a new way to bring people who have so far been hesitant about collectible card games or trading card games into this sort of genre. So I am super excited to see what comes out of it. This is, again, another fluffy question, but do you have a card or a piece of art so far that is your favorite?
I probably shouldn't mention my own favorites, but I do have. I did make a point to get 1 or 2 original art pieces from each artist, so I have some favorites there, of course, and there's a lot of cards that are sort of near and dear to me.
Okay, so this is something that we've learned during the pandemic, and something that is almost not essential, but something that is making a rise in people who play collectible card games. And I think that this wave of independent or less sort of mass distributed collectible card games will sort of bring up, and that is webcam playing. Do you envision that there is a way that this game can be played via webcam, or is that something that you don't think is possible considering the physical limitations of the game?
Yeah, so webcam play will be hard in the sense that since you share the gaming field, and you can go like on top of your opponent's sites and like stack minions on top of each other and so on. So that wouldn't work. What would work well though, like Tabletop Simulator works great. and I'll probably just have it mostly available there for people to play. So I have a kind of permissive attitude towards that. Like, I wouldn't want to like ban that type of online play.
Well, I do want to just call out now is that people can play this game on Tabletop Simulator right now. Am I right in saying that?
Yes, so people can play test these pre-constructed decks that are there. It's not the entire card pool, but it is like the proper game experience there. So yeah, any feedback from people that take their time to play there would be greatly appreciated.
Okay, well, just going to call it out now. There will be a link in the description to the Steam page for Tabletop Simulator. So check that out. If it's something that, if this game sounds at all interesting to you, jump in there, join the Facebook group, join the Discord, and check it out, because it is something that is going to be very rich, especially amongst the classics Magic the Gathering and classic card games, sort of 90s nostalgic community, because I feel like this does tap into that greatly. So my last sort of question is, of course, we're going to go back to where we started, which was Path of Exile. When you, earlier in the interview, you mentioned that you felt like it was obvious that there wasn't somebody operating in this space for Path of Exile. Nobody was making a game like Diablo 2, and you guys decided to make that, and it was going to be an obvious success. Do you feel that way about Sorcery?
Well, yes, obviously I do, because of how, well, from the art perspective, things just moved on from the traditional art, for example. And yeah, there's also, I guess, the connection with like Dungeons and Dragons and that type of more imaginative thing, as opposed to, yeah, so leaving it more to the players instead of creating IPs, that type of thing. Like, that's definitely a niche that I think is kind of open. I can't think of anyone that kind of tries to tap into that.
Well, I mean, you obviously have a ton of experience creating, like passionately creating something that you loved as a fan and making it hugely successful. And as we've spoken, I've only become more assured that your philosophy, as far as, you know, what your attitude is towards, you know, old school Magic, and as far as some of these tropes that have sort of become involved with collectible games. You know, we mentioned things like foiling and stuff before, and reprints. Like, I am only more confident, having spoken to you, that that old school Magic feel will be preserved with Sorcery.
I'm very much putting the kind of the feel of it first, and looking at it a bit like the sort of business of it is more of a secondary thing. And this project is very much made as a
passion project. Yep.
Yeah, project of love, I guess, towards that feel of it. So it will definitely stay true to that feel.
I am so excited to see where this goes, because I feel like this is something that doesn't exist at the moment. As a collectible game historian and you know, not to toot my own horn, but a Magic lover of their history, this game definitely appeals to me, and was the exact reason I wanted to reach out to you and have this interview. So thank you so much for doing that. Now, before we go, if you've seen previous episodes of the show, we always wrap up in the same way, and that is through our own little quiz section called Kraken Questions.
Release the Kraken.
So in this segment, we have original little booster packs here. You tell me which color you would like me to open up, and there is 4 additional questions. Now, there is 3 fun, silly questions and 1 rare game design question. You tell me which color you want to finish the show with, and we'll crack it open and see what happens.
Okay, I'll go with the red one.
The red one it is. All right, so in Kraken Questions, red, we have the following 4 questions. Again, remember, the common ones will be silly, and then the rare one will be serious. So, common question number 1. If you could magically be proficient at an Olympic sport, which would it be?
Well, it would be volleyball, but that's just because I played that before when I was younger.
You're a big volleyball fan?
Beach volleyball, to be exact. It's like what I would do in a different life.
Excellent, excellent. I'm so glad to hear. All right, so the next question is a CCG related one, and I think I know which game you might mention. But what is your favorite deck to play in any collectible card game?
Oh, it's the deck.
We mentioned Brian Weissman before. You mentioned how much you love that his work he did way back in the old school days.
Yeah, old school, the deck control decks have always been my thing in Magic. So
excellent. So we'll watch out for control and stuff like that. I did notice that was something that was really interesting when I was playtesting Sorcery is a lot of the counter sort of stuff and sort of like stuff that you would normally expect at a blue in Sorcery, you sort of see in the, is it right to say that it's in the Earth sort of centric stuff in Sorcery?
Yeah, so Earth is a bit of the sort of more grounded faction that fights against Magic more. So yeah, the color pie is definitely very different like that. And it's also all elements have some direct damage as well. It's just that it's done in different ways. So the color pie definitely has some sort of surprises to it if you're coming from a Magic the Gathering perspective.
Yeah, I really like the fact that Earth's creatures themselves seemed simpler, but their counter magic and sort of, being able to stop things seemed very, very blue, to put it in Magic the Gathering terms.
Yeah, so they are a bit of a sort of follow the rules and don't do anything fancy, kind of.
I love that. That's so, like you said, that's top-down design. You said that they were more grounded. What would be better for an Earth faction?
Yep.
All right, so last common question. What is your favorite tabletop gaming genre? And that could be TCGs or RPGs or any Euro games, anything.
Yeah, well, that's kind of obvious. It's TCGs. So it's a very simple question.
Yeah, we talk so much how the cracking of packs and that sort of meta and involving yourself in games is just, there is nothing else like it. And I love it as well. I can't disagree with that. All right, so the last question of the interview, and it is the rare question of the Booster Pack Kraken question segment. You may or may not have an answer about this. What is your least favorite thing about collectible games?
That's a tough one. Least favorite.
Yeah.
Common complaints like, I don't know, mana screw or bad common cards. I think those things have their place in a game. So it's a very, very tough question. Maybe it would be something like overly balanced to the point of boringness, maybe. I don't know. I'm kind of reaching here.
I like that answer. As somebody who loves old school, I think the excitement, and I think something that was learned by a lot of games nowadays, that initially the attitude towards Magic was, or many things, that it was to balance it so much on like a pinhead, make sure everything is balanced. And I think they've started to realize nowadays that the excitement is really in the overpowered cards, those exciting cards. We still talk about Moxes almost 30 years later, and they're some of the most exciting cards in the game.
Yeah, it's like everything has its place. Like you can have common cards that are still useful to the game and they can be very flavorful. I guess an example I have would be, there's this camel card or dromedary that has like really nice flavor text and sort of interesting art, but obviously it will not be the Black Lotus of the game. But that's fine. So.
Yeah, I love that card. An ordinary, what is it? An ordinary camel. I can't quite remember the text, but I do enjoy that card greatly. It's fantastic art.
Good that people actually enjoy what I think they will, or what I enjoy when it comes to that type of thing as well.
Excellent. So that is the end of our episode. Thank you so much for joining me, Eric. It has been an absolute pleasure getting your perspective on basically at ground zero of this brand new game that I'm so excited about. And hopefully we will be able to talk once the game is either on Kickstarter or something like that, maybe as a follow-up just to see where you're at or what's changed since we talked right now. So I'm so excited. Where do people find, I mentioned it before and there will be links in the description, but just to hear it from you, where do people find out about Sorcery?
So the most up-to-date place would be the Discord or the Facebook group. So that will be like Sorcery TCG on Facebook is the best place. But yeah, you will put your links down there, I hope.
Absolutely, absolutely. And if there's any updates or anything like that, I hope you let me know, or even a website coming up. Are you we hadn't really speak about it, but are you producing this under a specific company name or anything like that? Is there a company website or something that people can look for?
So there's no company website or game website up yet. I will get it up in time for the Kickstarter, but it has a company that's specifically made for this game called ERIK Olofsson.
Isn't that a card you mentioned before?
Also a card in the game, yes. Maybe that is my favorite card after all.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's named after your company. That's like Magic the Gathering having a card called the Wizard of the Coast or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
I can't wait. Again, it'll check out the game. Again, you can play test it now on a tabletop simulator, and you can join the Discord and help even influence this game that is going to be an amazing feat in retro feeling card game design. I can't wait. Thank you so much for joining me. I've been Rand on the Booster Pack. Eric, goodbye from you.
Thanks a lot for having me on. I hope we talk again later.
So do I. It has been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for joining me on the Booster Pack. Goodbye, everybody. Again, check the links in the description for the later show. All right. Bye. And there you have it, an epic interview all about Sorcery Contested Realm, an upcoming, beautifully looking collectible card game coming from ERIK Olofsson. Be sure to check the links in the description below so you can join the community at this early stage. Check it out on Facebook or on Discord, whichever you prefer, and follow along. You can even play test the game on Tabletop Simulator. There'll be a link for that below in the description as well. So be sure to give any feedback to the community of Sorcery Contested Realm as well if this is something that interests you. It interests me greatly because it's like playing a brand new collectible card game as if it was released in the 1990s. I loved it. Anyway, as for me, my name is Rands, and you can find me on Facebook or Twitter via CCG History. That's at CCG History on Twitter or facebook.com/CCG History. I am much more active on Twitter, by the way, so a follow there or even on Facebook will go a long way. As well, you could subscribe here, as all the kids say, in a cringeworthy way. You can let me know as well any feedback you have, and as well if there is a game, whether it is a older collectible card game or even one of these new emergent ones. I do want to start doing more content about those sort of games as they come out on this channel. Let me know whether it is a classic collectible card game that you used to love or collectible game of any sort, or one of these new ones that you're a little bit curious about, and we will bring you an interview with the creator on this channel. So that's about it as well. You can also make suggestions for our Kraken questions segment. Let us know if there is a silly question that you would just be delighted to hear somebody answer, or if there's a serious game design question you want to hear the perspective on. We will put it in a booster pack, shuffle it up with the others, and randomize it. And when a guest cracks it, we will obviously give you the credit. That's about it. Check out our other episodes if this is the sort of thing that you're interested in and you haven't seen any of the others. There is a bunch of other episodes with games like Legend of the Five Rings, Wyvern, Pokemon information, all sorts of stuff, even old school Magic the Gathering facts. Check out our earlier episodes of the Booster Pack. I would absolutely love you to become part of our community here. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, thank you to Eric for sharing all of that very, very primal information about this brand new collectible game that hopefully we see for years to come. I am so excited. It really does mesh with the aesthetic of collectible card games I love. I was never a grid style collectible card game player, but I feel like this one does some things that are really sort of clever that haven't been done before. So check it out. Again, all the links are in the description, and I appreciate you watching this episode all the way through. Thank you so much. Take it easy. Until next time, keep shuffling.